You wake before the sun, though it has been hours since darkness fell. The lime kiln breathes beside you, its low glow painting the stones in steady color. The olive grove behind the yard is still, its leaves unmoving, holding their scent close until the wind arrives. You stand slowly, feeling the warmth that has soaked into the bench through the night. Your eyes find the kiln mouth, where the fire is not fierce yet, but ready to be fed. You walk toward the arch, each step placing you deeper into the heat. The kiln stones are rough beneath your fingers, built to last more years than a man's working life. The arch itself is broad enough for a cart, though no cart comes near while the firing lasts. You crouch at the mouth, sensing the draft as it pulls inward. The coals inside are settled, their glow even, the flame curling low but alive. A plain fact known to every burner. Lime kilns of the 13th century often stood where stone, wood, and water met. Without all three, the work failed before it began. The stone was quarried nearby, the wood from the groves, the water from the well, a short walk beyond the wall. You reach for the olive logs stacked at the side, choosing the driest by weight and sound. A hollow knock tells you the wood will burn hot and quick. You lay 3 pieces across the bed, spacing them so air can pass. The flames answer with a shift in tone, a faint hiss, as the first sap burns away. Historians still argue whether all rural kilns in this age had permanent benches for the night watch. Some say the comfort was rare. Others say no man would stand for hours without a place to sit. Your bench tonight is a simple plank on 2 stones, worn smooth where hands and legs have rested for seasons. You step back into the cooler air, letting the fire draw on its own for a while. The grove remains still, but the kiln has begun its quiet conversation with the night. You wake beside the kiln before you open your eyes. The warmth has already found your skin, seeping through the rough wool of your blanket. You can feel the heat pressing against your cheek, not harsh yet, but insistent, like an early reminder that the work has not stopped in the hours you were lying here. Your breathing is slow, drawn out in the same rhythm as the kiln's exhale. The air smells thick with smoke and limestone dust, a dry taste that clings to the back of your tongue. You shift under the blanket, listening to the faint crunch of grit that is settled in the folds of your tunic. It's always there, no matter how many times you shake it out. Somewhere nearby, a log shifts inside the fire, collapsing into its own bed of embers with a sound like a sigh. You open your eyes to the dull orange glow reflecting off the inside of the kiln's mouth, a half circle of flickering light cut into the darkness. Your vision takes a moment to adjust. Beyond the ring of brightness is the rest of the yard, shadowed and still, shapes only barely suggested by the pale wash of starlight overhead. The ground is hard-packed earth, worn smooth in the places where feet tread the same lines night after night. The kiln itself is a low, rounded mound of clay and stone, its outer skin cracked in places where heat has pushed and shifted over the years. The top breathes out slow streams of pale smoke, ribbons that rise only a little before the breeze catches them. You can hear the fire inside, not a steady roar, but a pulse, almost like a living thing. You push yourself upright, careful not to brush the blanket too near the embers scattered on the ground. Your legs ache in that familiar dull way from squatting, lifting, and hauling. It's not pain you notice much anymore. It's simply part of the night. Around you, the others are still one man lying on his side near a stack of wood, another sitting with his chin on his chest, his hands loose in his lap. You know they will stir soon, the way you just did, each of you waking in turns to keep the fire's attention constant. Historians still argue whether lime burners in the 13th century took turns in true shifts, or whether, more often, the work blurred into a slow rhythm of shared endurance, no fixed rest, just brief pauses between duties. The kiln does not care for hours or bells. It cares only for steady feeding, for air in the right measure, for heat kept even. You stand fully now, brushing the grit from your hands. Your tunic smells faintly of yesterday's smoke, the scent woven into its fibers so deeply it will never quite leave. As you turn toward the fire's mouth, the warmth increases, climbing up your shins, your chest, until the skin on your face tightens slightly from the dry heat. Somewhere deep inside, chunks of limestone are slowly changing into quicklime, the chemical shift invisible to you, but essential to the masons and builders. who will use it in mortar. You know this process well enough that you can sense it in the kiln's voice, a low, constant hum, with the occasional sharper snap when a stone gives way. A moth drifts in the air between you and the kiln's glow, its pale wings catching the light before it vanishes again into the dark. You step closer, the first task of the night already in mind. You will check the fire, then the stones, then the clay seals, in that order. This is how you wake, not with words or greetings, but with the pull of work that has no true beginning or end. The stars above are hard points of white in a clear, cold sky. The night air on your back feels almost wet compared to the kiln's breath on your front. You stand there for a long moment, letting the contrast settle into your bones before you bend slightly to peer into the mouth of the kiln. The light inside is alive, folding and unfolding in slow motion, heat rolling outward in waves you can almost see. Somewhere far off, perhaps down the hill toward the village, a dog barks once, twice, then falls silent again. The rest of the world is still. But here, in the circle of light and dust and warmth, the night is already in motion. You shuffle closer to the kiln's mouth with the iron poker in your hand, its shaft warm from living beside the fire. The night presses cool against your back, while the kiln breathes hot against your face, and you let that balance settle your thoughts. You do not hurry. The coals prefer patience. You crouch, squinting into the arch, where the bed of embers looks like a low red sea, lapping and folding on itself. A thin ash is crusted over the surface. You know it must be broken so the heat will rise evenly. You slide the poker in and lift just a little, listening for the soft hiss the way a baker listens for the first sigh of dough. The sound comes, gentle and familiar. You move again, a long, smooth arc, the tip of the poker sketching a quiet path through orange and white. Your first work is always to make space for breath. The fire eats air just as it eats wood. You rake a channel from the center toward the back, opening a vein where new flame can run. Then you draw a little toward the front so the mouth does not starve. A few sparks drift out and fade on the earth by your feet. You smell resin still trapped in one stubborn log, a sweetness tucked inside the harsher smoke. The clay lip of the kiln radiates a steady, dry warmth you can feel through your sleeves. You shift on your heels, work slow, and keep the rhythm even, not letting any one part of the bed collapse into another. You glance to the draw hole, a squint of darkness low on the kiln side where the warm draft threads outward. A hand there tells you more than a look will, so you reach, palm open, and feel the moving air brush your skin. It is neither sluggish nor hard, just right for now. You will check again in a little while, because the kiln is moody when the night air changes. You lean back to the mouth and lift, smooth and settle, the poker tracing neat furrows as if combing a field by lamplight. The others stir behind you, a cough, a boot scuff, the crinkle of straw under a shoulder. No one speaks. This hour asks for small sounds. You slide a short fork in beside your poker and use both tools together to tease apart a clump where half-burnt wood is caved. It breaks obediently with a soft crumble. A glow rolls up like dawn on a small shore, and the bed looks even again. Your forearm prickles with heat, and the skin of your face tightens slightly, as if the fire is smoothing you like linen. You shift to the fire pit that feeds the main chamber, a shallow pocket where you manage the fresher logs before they enter the deeper heat. Here you flick away the fine ash with a flat-bladed rake, clearing the grate so breath can travel. Each small clearing keeps the larger path open. The kiln is only a body that needs room to breathe. You set 2 split pieces of beech near the lip to warm. They will take more gracefully when their chill has gone. You listen to the tiny tick of expanding sapwood, a kind of whispering you have learned to trust. A plain fact anchors your night. Builders in these lands want lime for mortar more than almost anything else you can make with fire, and the towns keep growing stone upon stone. Churches rise, walls thicken, tiled roofs settle into shape. The mortar must be good, and good mortar asks for well-burned limestone and steady heat. You do not think about the churches or the walls while you stir. You think only about color, about the shade of the heart inside the kiln. When the glow reads like a deep peach and holds without flicker, the stones inside are drinking the heat as they should. A small superstition rides in your pocket, though you would not call it that aloud. An old burner once pressed an egg into your hand and told you to keep it near the kiln's mouth. If it begins to harden, he said, the heat is right, and if it cooks too fast, you are being impatient. You do not know whether the egg speaks truth or whether it only keeps your hand gentle, but you still set one on the warm clay beside the mouth some nights. And you do so now, feeling the shell with your fingertip. It sits there like a small moon, minding its own quiet change. Historians still argue whether kilns like yours in the 13th century were mostly simple clamps piled fresh for each burn, or whether many yards used more permanent, domed draw kilns with regular charging and vents. Yours has stone bones and a clay skin, and the old men say it has stood through more winters than they can count. But the talk reaches you sometimes when a traveler shares news of other towns. You think it doesn't matter which words they choose. The work asks for the same patience either way. You set the poker down and ease the bellows handle once, twice, 3 times, not a gale, just a breath. The leather wheezes softly. The fire answers with a deeper tone. You listen to that tone the way shepherds listen for a bell on the hillside. Too bright, and the wood will burn out its heart too fast. Too low, and the stones fall dull. You keep the middle, a modest warmth that endures. Your feet find their same places on the packed earth. One slightly forward, one back. Your body remembers where to stand. When ash gathers thick at the mouth, you cup a small clay scoop and lift it away, tipping it onto a growing pile that looks like gray snow. The dust drifts over your knuckles and clings to the hair on your wrists. You have learned to keep your hands away from your eyes, because lime dust bites when it finds wet skin. A little olive oil rubbed along your forearms at dusk helps the powder slide away later. It is an old habit someone taught you when you were younger. You feel its faint slickness now, warm and protective. You feed the kiln not with a rush, but with a kindness you like to pretend it notices. A short stick first, then a longer one, then a pause while the flame takes hold. You watch the color shift in slow degrees, from cherry to peach to a kind of soft yellow. That means you should wait and let the heat bite deeper. You think of the stones inside, not the broken lumps they are, but the powder they will become. White and fine and hungry for water. You think of the masons slaking that powder later, watching it hiss and steam in the tub. You can almost hear that future sound in the present hush. A night bird clicks somewhere in the trees. The stars go on being themselves. You draw the rake gently across the fire pit again and clear another shallow path. The work is hardly visible to anyone who is not you, but you know the difference. The kiln breathes more smoothly now. The egg rests, untroubled. The bellows waits for the next measured push. You look along the ground at the wood racks. They hunch like patient animals against the wall, their ends bound up from the damp with stones under each foot. You make a note to mend one slanting brace when the hour grows less hot. The beech pieces by the mouth have warmed. You roll one with your boot and admire the pale shimmer where sap tries to escape. You let it wait a little longer. You do not like to send a shivering log into the heart. A warmed log behaves. The air near your shoulders is cooler than the air at your knees, which makes you smile. The night always insists that you are taller than your heat. You straighten slowly and feel your back answer with a small, polite complaint. You rest your hands on your hips, then dust them together, and the powder floats away like a tiny weather. You step back, counting in your head. 1 breath for the kiln, 1 for yourself, 1 for the sleeping men, 1 for the hillside where the stone was cut, 1 for the quarryman whose hammer woke the rock. You return to the mouth and settle into another set of motions. Lift, smooth, open, and leave. The pattern is the comfort. You mark the way the glow now holds steady across the bed, without those sullen dark rifts that make you worry. You give the bellows a single thoughtful breath. The answer pleases you. For a moment, you do nothing at all, and simply let the kiln run. A chip of limestone near the lip fractures with a tiny pop, a reminder of the change none of you see. Powder waits inside stone. Mortar waits inside powder. Walls wait inside mortar. People will live behind those walls and not remember any of these hours, which is fine. The hours do not need remembering. They only need doing. You set the poker upright against the wall and wipe your palms on your tunic. The bed is even. The breath moves well. The color is kind. The night gives you more of itself. You are ready to measure the stones. You walk toward the pile of limestone, your boots scuffing over the gritty earth. The heap rises in the shadow just beyond the kiln's glow, pale shapes stacked without elegance but with purpose. The stones are irregular, some broad and flat, others squat and lumpy, but all share the same chalky coat that leaves a fine dust on your fingertips. You crouch at the nearest piece, laying your palm across its surface. It feels cool and solid, the opposite of what it will become after the fire has its long conversation with it. The night holds still here, just the faint hiss of the kiln behind you. You draw your hand along the stone's edge, noting the places where the quarryman's chisel left sharp angles. These ridges will crack sooner under heat, and you think about which pieces should go in first, which should wait. There's no written rule, just the kind of knowing that comes from staring at stones for years, until they seem to have moods. You've heard some say that limestone speaks to the burner. You'd never admit to believing it, but you still catch yourself listening when you run your hand over a new block. You lean in close to a large piece, sniffing faintly. Limestone itself doesn't smell much, but sometimes, from certain quarries, it carries a faint trace of the earth that slept in loamy, or even metallic. This one smells like dry dust, the kind that sits undisturbed until wind lifts it. You mark it in your mind as one to place deep inside the kiln, where the heat is constant and less fierce than at the mouth. The slow burn will draw its moisture without shocking it to fragments. Historians still argue whether lime burners in the 13th century sorted their stones strictly by size before firing, or whether, in small village kilns like this, decisions were made more by the feel of the stone than by measure. You know your own kiln doesn't take kindly to too many large blocks in one layer. The heat can't wrap itself evenly around them, and you'll end with a heart of unburned rock, heavy and useless. So you choose carefully. A rhythm like picking fruit in an orchard, this one now, that one later. Skip this, save that. You rise and lift a smaller stone, its weight settling into your forearm. You like to hold them this way, close against your ribs, so the balance is better when you walk. The dust rubs into the weave of your tunic, leaving pale streaks that will never fully wash away. Your fingertips are dry now, the skin tight from the powder clinging to them. Sometimes, on damp nights, the dust will cake and soften into paste, but tonight it stays light, floating off with each movement. From somewhere near the woodpile, you hear a quiet grunt, one of the other burners, shifting in his half-sleep, perhaps turning over on his bundle of straw. You work without needing to speak to anyone. The kiln doesn't mind silence. It has its own voice. You rest the small stone back on the ground and run your hands over a larger one, the size of a loaf. The coolness in its heart tells you it's been waiting in the open air for some days now. It will go in soon. A plain fact drifts through your thoughts as you work. Limestone is nothing more than old sea life, pressed and hardened over ages. Shells and corals turned to rock by time. The village children sometimes bring you pebbles with fossil shells in them, little spirals locked in pale stone. You've set a few aside, not for firing, but simply because they feel like company in the quiet hours. You have one of those tucked in your pouch now, a tiny shell shape you rub with your thumb when the night feels too long. You stand and take 2 steps to a different part of the pile, where the stones are newer from the quarry. These still have sharper edges and a faint dampness from their cutting. They'll need to rest a little longer before they see fire. You press your palm flat against one to test its cool breath. It's damp enough to give a faint chill to your skin, and you pull your hand away, satisfied to let it wait. You pick another, one with a clean break across its face, and tap it lightly with your knuckle. The sound is hollow, almost like a drum. That one will burn evenly, so you set it aside near the kiln's mouth. A quirk of the trade says you should always leave one stone untouched on the pile through the whole burn as a watcher for the others. It's nothing more than a habit passed along with the work, but you find yourself keeping to it, even when no one is watching. You've chosen the watcher for tonight, a block with a vein of pale brown running through it. You'll not move it until the fire has had its fill of all the rest. You squat again, brushing the dust from your palms against your knees, though it only shifts from one surface to another. The ground beneath you is hard and cold, a reminder of the hour. You gather 3 medium stones, one in each arm, and one hugged to your chest, and rise slowly, feeling the weight settle through your hips into your heels. The kiln waits behind you, its warmth just touching the edge of your shoulder. You will walk them over next, feed them in the right order, and let the night continue its slow turning. You glance up, once before you move, noting the stars. They seem a little brighter now, though you know it's only your eyes adjusting after staring at pale stone. You breathe once, twice, feeling the dust in your nose, the coolness on your back, the warmth in your arms from the stone's recent sun. Then you take the first step toward the kiln, ready to feed its steady hunger. You balance the wicker basket against your hip, feeling the rough weave press into your side. It's not heavy yet, only half full of limestone chunks, but the weight leans you slightly, and you adjust your stride so it swings just enough to settle comfortably. The basket's handle is a loop of twisted willow, softened by years of use but still creaking faintly when you shift it. You like that sound. It is a work sound, the kind that lives in your ear without calling attention to itself. The ground between the pile and the kiln is worn flat by countless trips, a path packed hard as stone by boots and baskets. In the dark, you step along it without thinking, your feet finding the slight hollows and rises you know better than the lines of your own hands. Here, the soil is dry, but near the kiln it softens from ash and the dampness the night air draws from the fire's breath. Your soles make a muted crunch, a rhythm that matches the swing of the basket. The heat grows with each step toward the kiln. At first it's a faint promise on your shins, then a real warmth on your face, then a full body press that makes your tunic cling slightly to your back. You stop a few paces short, setting the basket down on a flat patch of earth, careful not to spill. The stones settle with a soft, dusty clatter inside the wicker. You kneel beside them, looking at each in turn, thinking about where it will sit in the kiln's belly. One piece, flat and wide, will go on the side where the heat wraps gently. A smaller, rounder one will fit nearer the draw hole where the air pulls strongest. You touch each, turning it in your hand, weighing not only its mass, but its shape. The kiln doesn't like wasted space. A stone poorly placed leaves gaps where heat slips away. You've seen younger burners toss them in without care, and you've also seen the results. Half-burned lumps that crumble wrong, leaving the masons with weak mortar. That won't happen under your watch tonight. A plain fact holds steady in your mind. In 13th century Italy, lime was not only for mortar, but also for whitewashing walls, sealing cisterns, and treating hides. The villagers know that without your kiln, the work of building and mending would slow to a crawl. You may be covered in dust and sweat, but in your quiet way, you are part of the walls, the wells, the roofs that keep them safe. You lift the first stone from the basket and carry it to the kiln's mouth. The heat there pushes at you like an open hand. You lean in just enough, setting the stone gently on the edge before nudging it in with the poker. It slides into place, finding its home among the glowing bed. A faint hiss rises as trapped moisture meets the heat. You watch for a breath, making sure it settles without tumbling. Then you step back, blinking against the brightness, and reach for the next. There's a small superstition among burners that says, if you drop a stone into the kiln without looking, trusting your hand, the stone will burn truer. You tried it once, years ago, and the stone cracked in half before its time. Since then, you always watch, always guide. The kiln may be old, but it is not forgiving. Historians still argue whether lime burners in your century worked mostly alone through the night, or in small teams with each man fixed to a single task. In your yard, everyone learns to do a bit of everything. Tonight, you are both hauler and feeder, and that suits you fine. The movement keeps the cold from creeping too deep into your bones. When you step away from the kiln's warmth, you take the last stone from the basket, its weight tugging at your arm as you cross back to the fire. This one you place near the side wall, where the heat curls up from below and lingers before escaping through the flue. You push it into position, hearing the soft clink as it settles against its neighbors. A small puff of white dust lifts into the air, catching in the glow before fading. When the basket is empty, you set it upright near the kiln side, where it will be ready for the next load. You rub your palms together, sending a faint cloud of dust into the night. The particles drift upward, catching in the starlight like tiny pale gnats. You breathe in, slow, feeling the mixture of cool night air and warm limestone scent fill your chest. Somewhere behind you, a log splits in the fire pit with a sharp crack, and the kiln's tone deepens for a moment, before settling back to its steady hum. You let your shoulders drop, knowing the stones you've just fed will now begin their slow change. There is nothing more to do for them but keep the heat right, the air steady, and the rhythm unbroken. You glance at the path back to the pile. It waits, pale in the moonlight, ready for your feet again. The night will see many such trips before the sky grows light. You lift the basket by its willow handle, the creek greeting you once more, and start the slow walk back into the cool side of the yard, where the next armful of stone lies waiting. You stand before the kiln's mouth again, this time with the stones ready in your hands, and the fire waiting for its next meal. The glow is strong, not glaring, but deep and full, like the inside of a peach held to the sun. You can feel its warmth before you're close enough to feed it. The air shimmers faintly between you and the flames, the way summer heat dances above a road. You take a slow step forward, steadying your breath. Feeding the kiln is not a matter of throwing. It is a matter of placing. You crouch low, angling your body so the heat brushes the side of your face, rather than striking you head on. The first stone you set is small, its rounded edges finding a hollow in the bed of embers. It hisses softly, like rain touching a hot tile. The second stone is flatter, and you lean it against the first so they will heat evenly. You've learned that stones burn better in company than alone. Their heat reflects between them, keeping the temperature steady. The fire responds to your offerings. A log shifts somewhere in the back, releasing a few sparks that rise and vanish in the hot air. You use the poker to ease one of the new stones deeper, feeling the faint resistance as it settles among its neighbors. The embers shift, the colors changing from white at the heart to orange at the edges. The kiln sighs. You like to think it knows the difference between good stone and poor. A plain fact steadies your thoughts. Once limestone is burned into quicklime, it becomes hungry for water. It will hiss, steam, and grow hot if slaked. This is the nature of the stone's transformation, from quiet solidity to something that reacts, binds, and holds. You can't see that future now, but you know every hiss and pop inside the kiln is part of that journey. You glance at the clay seals along the kiln's edges, making sure they remain unbroken. The clay keeps the heat where it belongs, but it also gives the kiln a kind of patched-together look, as if it's wearing a skin mended too many times to count. Some burners leave cracks, saying the kiln needs to breathe through them, but you know that's just laziness dressed as wisdom. Your kiln holds its heat tight. Historians still argue whether medieval lime burners used any tools for exact temperature readings, or whether they relied solely on the look of the fire and the feel of the air. You've only ever trusted your eyes and your skin. When the glow at the base of the kiln holds without flickering, and the heat at your cheek feels steady as a slow breath, you know you're in the right place. You feed in another stone, nudging it to the back where the heat lingers longer. The kiln's interior light dances along the white dust that drifts off your sleeve, turning it gold before it vanishes. For a moment you pause, resting the poker's handle against your shoulder. The warmth has worked its way deep into your arms, loosening the stiffness that crept in earlier. There's a small, quiet superstition you follow here. Always feed the kiln an odd number of stones at a time. You can't say why, except that the man who taught you swore even numbers confused the fire. Tonight you've given it 3 in this round, and you step back feeling the balance is right. You straighten, letting the cooler air slide over the back of your neck. The stars above are still sharp, the moon low and pale. The yard around you is all shadow and ash except for the circle of light that belongs to the kiln. You step to the side to stretch your legs, brushing your palms against your tunic again, watching the fine white dust drift into the night. A faint creak from the wood racks draws your attention aboard settling, or perhaps one of the other men rising to check on something. You leave the poker propped upright by the kiln's mouth, knowing you'll be back soon. For now, the stones are placed, the fire is steady, and the kiln breathes on its own. You take a slow sip from the water skin, cool liquid washing the dust from your throat, before turning toward the bellows. The fire has eaten well for the moment. It will want air next. You stand before the kiln's mouth again, this time with the stones ready in your hands, and the fire waiting for its next meal. The glow is strong, not glaring, but deep and full, like the inside of a peach held to the sun. You can feel its warmth before you're close enough to feed it. The air shimmers faintly between you and the flames, the way summer heat dances above a road. You take a slow step forward, steadying your breath. Feeding the kiln is not a matter of throwing, it is a matter of placing. You crouch low, angling your body so the heat brushes the side of your face rather than striking you head on. The first stone you set is small, its rounded edges finding a hollow in the bed of embers. It hisses softly, like rain touching a hot tile. The second stone is flatter, and you lean it against the first so they will heat evenly. You've learned that stones burn better in company than alone. Their heat reflects between them, keeping the temperature steady. The fire responds to your offerings. A log shifts somewhere in the back, releasing a few sparks that rise and vanish in the hot air. You use the poker to ease one of the new stones deeper, feeling the faint resistance as it settles among its neighbors. The embers shift, the colors changing from white at the heart to orange at the edges. The kiln sighs. You like to think it knows the difference between good stone and poor. A plain fact steadies your thoughts. Once limestone is burned into quicklime, it becomes hungry for water. It will hiss, steam, and grow hot if slaked. This is the nature of the stone's transformation from quiet solidity to something that reacts, binds, and holds. You can't see that future now, but you know every hiss and pop inside the kiln is part of that journey. You glance at the clay seals along the kiln's edges, making sure they remain unbroken. The clay keeps the heat where it belongs, but it also gives the kiln a kind of patched-together look, as if it's wearing a skin mended too many times to count. Some burners leave cracks, saying the kiln needs to breathe through them, but you know that's just laziness dressed as wisdom. Your kiln holds its heat tight. Historians still argue whether medieval lime burners used any tools for exact temperature readings, or whether they relied solely on the look of the fire and the feel of the air. You've only ever trusted your eyes and your skin. When the glow at the base of the kiln holds without flickering, and the heat at your cheek feels steady as a slow breath, you know you're in the right place. You feed in another stone, nudging it to the back where the heat lingers longer. The kiln's interior light dances along the white dust that drifts off your sleeve, turning it gold before it vanishes. For a moment you pause, resting the poker's handle against your shoulder. The warmth has worked its way deep into your arms, loosening the stiffness that crept in earlier. There's a small, quiet superstition you follow here. Always feed the kiln an odd number of stones at a time. You can't say why, except that the man who taught you swore even numbers confused the fire. Tonight you've given it 3 in this round, and you step back feeling the balance is right. You straighten, letting the cooler air slide over the back of your neck. The stars above are still sharp, the moon low and pale. The yard around you is all shadow and ash, except for the circle of light that belongs to the kiln. You step to the side to stretch your legs, brushing your palms against your tunic again, watching the fine white dust drift into the night. A faint creak from the wood racks draws your attention, a board settling, or perhaps one of the other men rising to check on something. You leave the poker propped upright by the kiln's mouth, knowing you'll be back soon. For now, the stones are placed, the fire is steady, and the kiln breathes on its own. You take a slow sip from the water skin, cool liquid washing the dust from your throat, before turning toward the bellows. The fire has eaten well for the moment. It will want air next. Word count 1052. Awaiting continue. You said, continue. ChatGPT said, section 6. You step to the bellows, the leather folds resting in their frame, like the lungs of some quiet waiting animal. The handles are smooth from years of hands pushing and pulling them. You take hold, feeling the faint give of the leather when you lean your weight forward. The night air behind you is cool. The heat from the kiln's side presses against your shins. Between them, you stand in a pocket where the air feels balanced, as if you belong there. The first push is slow, deliberate. You hear the soft wheeze as the bellows exhales into the kiln, followed by the faint change in the fire's tone, deeper, richer, as though it's pleased. You draw back again, filling the bellows with fresh air, the leather folding open with a quiet creak. Another push, another breath into the kiln's heart. You keep the rhythm steady. Push, pause, pull, pause. It's a movement you could make in your sleep, and perhaps you have, on nights when your eyes felt too heavy. The bellows themselves carry a scent, part smoke, part old hide, part ash that has drifted down over seasons. Your hands remember their shape as much as your eyes do. The handles are worn in the places where fingers have curled for decades, polished smooth without losing the small ridges of the wood grain. A plain fact passes through your thoughts. In 13th century Italy, lime kilns often needed constant airflow for days at a time, and the bellows were the lifeline when the wind refused to help. Without them, the fire might cool enough to ruin an entire batch. That knowledge is why you never rush the motion too much air, and the flames run wild. Too little, and they sulk. The middle path keeps the kiln alive. You glance toward the kiln's mouth between pushes. The glow inside responds to your work, the embers shifting just enough to catch more wood and draw heat into the stones. You can see the faint shimmer of the air moving upward, carrying the kiln's breath into the night sky. Somewhere in that heat, the limestone is losing its water, its carbon dioxide, becoming something entirely different, though it looks unchanged to your eyes. Historians still argue whether bellows in small village kilns were worked in long, dedicated shifts by one man, or whether they were shared between all hands. In your yard, whoever stands closest often becomes the bellows man for a while. Tonight, it's you, and you settle into it without complaint. The fire likes your pace. You keep the motion easy, your body swaying slightly with each stroke. The leather folds and stretches like a living thing, whispering on the forward push, sighing on the pull. Your palms grow warm where they meet the handles, and a faint ache starts in your shoulders, but it's the kind of ache that means the work is being done right. You know that if you listen closely enough, the kiln tells you when to rest, when to push harder, when to let it be. A moth drifts past, caught briefly in the warm updraft before it flutters away. The night is quiet otherwise, except for the sound of the bellows and the low hum of the fire. You think about the men who made these bellows, the cut of the leather, the stitching along the seams, the way the wood was shaped to fit a grip that could last through years of nights like this. Tools, like kilns, hold the memory of the hands that have kept them alive. You pause after a long pull, resting the bellows half full. The kiln's glow remains steady, the air moving well on its own for the moment. You let your hands hang at your sides, flexing your fingers to ease the stiffness. A fine dust clings to your knuckles, catching the firelight before falling away. You take another short turn at the handles, 3 slow pushes, each followed by a careful pull. Then you step back, satisfied with the tone of the fire. The stones will feel that air in their bones, if stones have bones, and the heat will wrap more tightly around them now. You let the bellows rest, their leather folding gently in on itself like a sleeping thing. Your next task waits outside, where the air smells different. You'll step away from the kiln's side for a moment. Let the cool night fill your lungs, and remember that there is a world beyond the circle of light. You step away from the kiln's side, feeling the change in the air the moment you leave its glow. The heat no longer wraps your legs, and the cool night folds itself around you like a damp wool cloak. Your lungs open wider as you take in the air, the dryness of smoke giving way to something fresher, edged with the faint scent of soil and far-off leaves. You walk slowly, letting your eyes adjust to the softer darkness beyond the fire's reach. A few steps more, and the noise of the kiln dulls behind you. It's still there, a low breathing in the distance, but here the night sounds have more room. Crickets trade small notes in the grass, and from somewhere down the slope, the gentle rush of water murmurs perhaps the stream that runs near the quarry. You pause to listen, not for any reason other than the comfort of knowing the world is still turning outside the circle of work. You glance up, the stars seem sharper here, away from the kiln's orange light. They sit in the sky like they've been hammered into a dark sheet of metal, unchanging yet patient. You pick out a familiar cluster, one you followed on many nights like this, marking the hours as it drifts toward the horizon. You know the kiln will still be burning when it has slid out of sight. A plain fact rests in your mind. Lime burners often worked in open spaces outside the village, both to keep the heavy smoke away from homes, and because the fires could be dangerous if too close to buildings. It means your nights are always under the open sky, with the cold and stars as steady companions. You've never decided whether that's a blessing or a nuisance. You shift your weight, feeling the absence of heat in your joints. The night air cools your cheeks, a welcome balance after the kiln's constant press. Your tunic moves more freely now, no longer sticking to your back with sweat. You roll your shoulders, loosening the stiffness from tending the bellows. Historians still argue whether medieval limeyards like yours had any kind of shelter for the men at night, or whether you worked entirely in the open. You have only a small lean-to by the woodpile, and even that feels like more than some. You've heard of burners sleeping on bare ground, their blankets pulled tight against the dew, the kiln their only roof. Tonight, you're content to stand in the open, feeling the air shift against your skin. From here, you can see the faint line of the village below, just a few dots of firelight through shutters, and one moving torch along the main path. It could be a watchman, or a late returning farmer, or someone carrying news to a neighbor. You wonder, briefly, if they look up towards your kiln and notice its constant glow. Probably not. People only think of the lime yard when they need mortar or a wall mended. That's fine. The work is meant to be quiet, unseen. You take a deeper breath, letting the coolness sink into you. The smoke from the kiln lingers faintly even out here, curling on the breeze before it disappears into the trees. Your hands feel lighter now without tools in them, though the dust remains along your fingers and nails, a pale reminder of the stones you've handled. You rub your thumb across your forefinger, feeling the grit ease away. Somewhere in the dark, an owl calls a low, rounded sound that seems to pass right through the air, rather than across it. You listen until it fades, then start the slow walk back toward the fire's reach. The first step into its glow feels like stepping into another season entirely. From autumn night to midsummer warmth, your cheeks tighten from the sudden change, and the faint sweat that had cooled there wakes again. The kiln is waiting, its orange mouth steady, its breath unchanged by your brief absence. The men near the woodpile are still quiet, one of them now sitting with his elbows on his knees, watching the flames without speaking. You give him a nod as you pass, the kind of nod that says nothing more than, "I see you." You're ready for a short meal now. The bread will be dry, the olive sharp, but both will taste better for having been earned. You sit on the low stone ledge near the kiln, the warmth at your side and the cool air brushing your back. From a small cloth bundle, you pull out a rough heel of bread. Its crust is dark and hard enough that you have to press your thumb into it before breaking off a piece. The inside is dense and slightly sour, the way bread keeps best over days of work. Beside it, wrapped in another scrap of cloth, are a handful of olives, still glistening from the oil they were packed in. You hold one between your fingers, its skin cool and firm, before rolling it into your mouth. The salt spreads quickly across your tongue, and you chew slowly, letting the sharpness cut through the dust and smoke still in your throat. The bread follows, soaking up the last of the oil and softening just enough to chew without strain. You eat without speaking, though one of the other men has taken a place beside you, pulling his own loaf from a pouch at his belt. His eyes are on the fire, his hands moving in the same rhythm as yours. Bread, olive, bread, olive, as if the meal itself follows the kiln's breathing. A plain fact settles in your thoughts. Lime burners often ate in short, quiet breaks, not because there wasn't time for talk, but because the work set its own pace. You didn't want to lose the thread of it by filling the air with words. The kiln was the clock, and you obeyed. Now and then, the man beside you passes his own olive jar your way, and you take one without looking, letting the exchange pass like the trading of tools. You offer him a slice of your bread in return, and he nods slightly. No one says, "Thank you." It isn't needed. The night itself hears. Historians still argue whether meals in medieval limeyards were taken near the kiln for warmth or farther away to avoid the constant smoke. You've done both, but tonight you stay close. The heat keeps your fingers nimble, and the firelight makes the olive shine in the palm of your hand. You chew slowly, watching the embers shift in the kiln's mouth. The stones you placed earlier are hidden now, buried in the glow, their work unseen but steady. Each bite of bread is followed by the faint crackle of sap deep inside the burning wood. Now and then, a small pop from the kiln reminds you that the stones are still alive to the heat, changing grain by grain. From the shadows behind you, another man approaches with a goatskin water skin. He tips it toward you, and you take a slow drink, the water cool even after hours near the kiln. It washes the salt from your mouth, leaving behind only the faint tang of smoke. You pass it back, and he drinks in the same quiet way, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand before stepping away again. You tear the last piece of bread in half, tucking one piece back into the cloth for later. The olives are gone, only the faint sheen of oil left on your fingertips. You rub your hands together lightly, the oil mixing with the dust to form a pale film. You'll wipe it away later, but for now it keeps your skin from drying too much in the heat. The man beside you finishes his meal and rises without a word, heading toward the woodpile. You watch him for a moment, the way his shadow lengthens against the kiln's side, then vanishes into the darker edge of the yard. You know you'll take your turn hauling again soon enough, but for now you lean back slightly, letting the fire warm your shoulder while the cool air runs along your neck. The night feels older now, settled into its stride. You can feel it in your bones, the sense that there's still much to do, but no need to rush. The kiln will take what it's given, one stone, one log, one breath of air at a time. You take another sip from the water skin before setting it down on the stone beside you. Somewhere far off, a dog barks twice, then stops. The fire keeps its own counsel. You gather your bundle, tie the cloth neatly, and stand. The meal is over. The work waits. You crouch low at the base of the kiln, where the draw hole is set into its clay skin. It's no more than a dark mouth at knee height, framed by baked earth that is smooth from the touch of countless hands. You lean forward, resting one palm on the ground for balance, and peer into the narrow opening. At first there is only shadow, but as your eyes adjust, you see the faint pulse of red deep inside, like a hidden ember breathing. You shift slightly to feel the air. The warmth slides out against your cheek, not as fierce as the kiln's upper mouth, but steady enough to tell you the fire's heart is still strong. A faint dust drifts with it, pale, almost white in the glow, and you watch it curl outward before settling on the ground in front of you. You've learned that the speed and thickness of that dust can tell you things. If it drifts too fast, the fire is running hot and impatient. If it falls too heavy, the burn is sluggish. Tonight it moves with a quiet balance, the kind you prefer. A plain fact stays with you. The draw hole in a lime kiln serves as both a vent and a way to pull out small samples of stone to test the burn. Not yet, though. The stones you placed earlier are still far from ready. Testing too soon wastes heat and effort. You will wait. The earth under your palm is warm, almost pleasant, though it roughens your skin with its grit. You shift your weight and bring your other hand up to shield your eyes from stray sparks. Sometimes, a tiny coal will tumble down and roll toward the opening, glowing briefly before cooling in the night air. You see one now, no larger than a seed, and watch as it fades from red to black. Historians still argue whether medieval lime burners regularly checked the draw hole, or if it was opened only at specific stages of the burn. In your yard, it is checked whenever the fire feels different, and the fire always feels different if you're paying enough attention. You don't wait for hours or schedules. You listen. You lean closer, your ear just inside the opening, to catch the sound. The kiln's voice here is deeper, a low hum beneath the crackle of burning wood above. It reminds you of wind moving through a narrow pass. You breathe in slowly, catching the faint dryness of lime dust at the back of your throat. It's not enough to choke, but it leaves a taste you'll carry until morning. You reach to the side, where a small stick lies ready. Its tip is blackened from past checks. You slide it gently into the opening, feeling for the warmth just beyond the lip. The heat comes fast, and you withdraw it before the wood can char. It's a small, wordless conversation with the fire, enough to tell you it's working as it should. A moth drifts through the warm draft, its wings catching the faint glow before it flutters away. The night beyond the kiln is silent for a moment, as if holding its breath while you work. You stay crouched there, the warmth soaking into your knees, until you are satisfied that nothing is amiss. The ground in front of the draw hole is pale with a fine layer of dust. You brush a little aside with your fingertips, revealing the darker earth beneath. The dust clings stubbornly, settling into the lines of your skin. You wipe your hand on your tunic, leaving faint white streaks that will stay until morning. When you stand, your knees creak faintly in the quiet. You take one last look at the opening, the faint red glow still steady inside, then step back into the fuller warmth of the kiln's main mouth. The draw hole has spoken its piece for now. You'll return to it later, when the fire's mood changes. For the moment, there's another task waiting. The clay seals along the kiln's skin need checking before the night wears further on. You move along the curve of the kiln, your boots stirring the fine ash that has settled in shallow drifts against its base. The kiln's surface feels alive under your hand, warm, almost breathing as you trail your fingers over the baked clay. In the firelight, you can see the seams where fresh clay was pressed in days ago, the edges darker where they've baked under the heat. Each seam is a promise to keep the warmth inside. You stop at the first patch that looks suspect. The surface here has begun to dry and crack, thin lines spreading out like a river's tributaries. You crouch, pressing a fingertip to the gap. It's warm enough to make you pull back slightly, but not so hot that you can't touch it. The crack is narrow, but you know from experience that it will widen if left alone. From a low wooden bucket nearby, you scoop up a handful of fresh clay. It's cool and damp in your palm, the moisture seeping between your fingers. You knead it briefly to make it pliable, then press it into the gap, smoothing it with the heel of your hand. The clay sticks easily to the warm surface, steaming faintly as it meets the heat. You press until the seam disappears, leaving only a faint smudge where your palm has passed. A plain fact comes to mind. Clay seals in a lime kiln aren't only for holding heat, they also keep drafts from disrupting the burn. Even a small leak can change the way the fire curls inside, robbing one side of stones while scorching another. You've seen what happens when the seals are ignored, a whole night's work wasted. The stones burned unevenly, the lime brittle and weak. You move to the next seam, where the clay has flaked away entirely, leaving a finger-wide gap that exhales a steady trickle of heat. You work quickly, scooping and pressing, the coolness of the fresh clay fading in your hand as the kiln drinks it in. A faint hiss rises from the spot as the moisture steams away. The smell is earthy and clean, a brief reminder of wet soil after rain. Historians still argue whether medieval kilns were resealed constantly during a burn, or if the clay was applied thickly enough at the start to last through the night. You've always found it better to tend the seals as you go. A kiln changes as it burns, and ignoring those changes is inviting trouble. By the third seam, your fingers are coated in a fine mix of wet clay and pale lime dust. It forms a paste that clings stubbornly, making your skin feel both gritty and slick. You wipe your hands on a scrap of old cloth, though it does little more than spread the mixture evenly. You don't mind. It's part of the work. As you press the last patch into place, you notice a small chip of stone lodged in the kiln's outer skin. You pluck it free and turn it in your fingers. It's half-baked, pale on one side and darker on the other. It must have tumbled out during an earlier burn and become trapped here. You toss it aside into the ash, where it lands with a soft puff. Stepping back, you look over your work. The kiln's skin is smooth again, the seams tight, the heat flowing only where it should. You rest your palm flat against one newly patched spot, feeling the warmth seep into your hand. There's a certain quiet pride in this, knowing you've kept the kiln whole for another stretch of hours. The fire hums steadily behind the clay, its breath unchanged by your work, but you know it's stronger for it. You wipe your hands one last time on the cloth, then drop it back into the bucket, where it will wait for the next repair. The glow from the kiln's mouth draws your eye again. It's time to listen closely, to lean near, and hear how the stones are taking the heat. You step back toward the kiln's mouth, the light spilling across the ground in a warm, uneven pool. The air here has weight, pressing against your skin and filling your nostrils with a dry, mineral heat. You crouch low, leaning just close enough to feel the wave of warmth brush your cheek. The glow inside is steady, deep orange at the edges, and pale white at the heart, a sign that the fire is eating well. You tilt your head, letting your ear guide you. At first, there's only the familiar crackle of wood, but beneath it, you catch something softer, a series of faint pops, almost too quiet to notice, like the sound of kernels bursting under a lid. That is the stone's voice, telling you it's loosening under the heat. Each pop means another pocket of moisture escaping, another small shift toward becoming lime. You listen longer, eyes half closed, letting the rhythm sink in. A plain fact runs through your thoughts. Limestone is mostly calcium carbonate, and when heated long enough, it releases carbon dioxide and becomes calcium oxide quicklime. The sound you hear now is the start of that transformation, an unseen change that will go on for hours. You lean forward a little more, careful not to touch the kiln's edge. The air that rolls out is almost sharp against your skin, as if it's carrying a fine powder with it. You breathe shallowly, tasting the faint bitterness of lime dust on your tongue. That taste will linger for the rest of the night, no matter how much water you drink. Historians still argue whether medieval lime burners could tell the exact stage of the burn just by sound alone, or if it was always combined with the sight of the fire and the feel of the air. You've never separated them, the three senses work together, each confirming what the others suspect. A log shifts deeper inside, and the kiln answers with a low, rising roar as fresh air slips into the space it left behind. The white core brightens, and for a few heartbeats the heat intensifies, pressing harder at your face. You blink, then watch as the glow settles again. That's a good sign. It means the fire is balanced, not lurching from hunger to glut. You shift your weight and rest your forearms on your knees, staying in that listening crouch a little longer. The kiln hums softly now, the wood's voice and the stone's voice blending into one. In the quiet between the pops, you think you can hear the faint hiss of resin burning inside a log, a small, sweet note amid the harsher scents. From the corner of your eye, you notice one of the stones near the front has begun to change. Its surface is lighter than before, the chalky white pushing through where the heat licks it most. You mark it in your mind. When more of them look like that, you'll know it's time for another careful feeding. You sit back on your heels, rolling your shoulders to ease the tightness from crouching. The ground under you is warm, as if the kiln's heat has seeped deep into the packed earth. It feels good against your boots. When you stand, you take one more look into the kiln's mouth. The glow, the sound, the smell, all are in agreement. The fire is steady, the stones are speaking, and the night is giving you time to keep it that way. The wood pile waits nearby, but the next job isn't feeding just yet. First, you'll haul fresh logs from the outer stack, so they're close and ready for the next turn. You turn from the kiln's mouth toward the shadowed edge of the yard, where the outer wood stack leans against a low wall. Out here, the warmth fades step by step, replaced by the cooler breath of the night. Your eyes adjust quickly, the glow behind you outlining your shadow along the ground, until it stretches thin and disappears into the dark. The wood stack is taller than you, the split ends of the logs facing outward in neat rows. Some pieces are pale and fresh cut, their edges still sharp. Others have weathered to a silver gray, the grain softened by months of drying in the sun. You place your palm on one of the fresher pieces and feel a faint coolness, the kind that warns it will resist the fire if fed too soon. Those you leave where they are. You reach instead for the seasoned beech, lighter in the hand, hollow sounding when knocked together. A plain fact you know without thinking. Seasoned wood burns hotter and more evenly than fresh, giving the kiln a steady heart instead of a wild, smoky one. The beech also carries a faint sweet smell when burned, something you've learned to notice even through the heavier scent of limestone and ash. You stack 3 logs in your arms, balancing their weight so none will slip. The bark flakes against your tunic, leaving tiny curls of wood clinging to the weave. You carry them toward the inner pile beside the kiln, where they'll warm before use. The closer they sit to the fire, the more willingly they'll catch when their turn comes. Historians still argue whether medieval lime burners stored their wood in large communal stacks or kept smaller, personal piles to manage as they wished. In your yard, the wood belongs to everyone, and no one marks their share. You take what the fire needs, and the others do the same, trusting the stack will be rebuilt before the next burn. You set the logs down on the inner pile, the ends making a soft thud against the ground. Then you return for more, this time choosing pieces with straighter grain, easier to split if needed. A knotty log can slow the fire's rhythm, making you work harder at the bellows to keep the heat steady. You've learned to be particular, better to carry an extra load now than fight a stubborn log later. The walk between the stacks is short, but after a few trips, you can feel the faint pull in your shoulders and arms. You pause for a breath beside the kiln, letting its warmth soak into your chest before turning again to the cool shadows. Each crossing feels like moving between 2 seasons, summer at the kiln, late autumn at the stack. A small sound draws your attention, the creak of the woodpile shifting under its own weight. You glance over and see nothing out of place, but you know the sound well. Wood settles as it dries, the fibers tightening in the night air. Sometimes you hear the faint pop of sap breaking in the older pieces, a quiet reminder that even cut wood still changes with time. You take one last armful, tucking a shorter log under your elbow for balance. This time, as you pass into the kiln's glow, the fire seems to reach for you, its heat brushing your face before you've even set the wood down. The air here feels thicker now, holding more of the fire's scent. You add the new logs to the warming pile, arranging them so the ends face the heat. Soon enough, they'll be ready to take their place in the kiln's heart. For now, you dust your hands on your tunic, sending a few splinters and bits of bark to the ground. The stars above are still sharp, the moon now lower toward the trees. The night is moving forward, and the kiln asks for you to move with it. You glance toward the shovel leaning nearby the edges of the fire pit, could use tending before the next feeding. You take the shovel from where it rests against the wall, its iron blade darkened from years of ash and heat. The handle is smooth, polished by the hands of many burners before you, and it fits easily into your grip. You walk to the edge of the fire pit, where the wood is fed before being drawn deeper into the kiln's belly. Here, the ground is warm under your boots, soft with a layer of fine ash that shifts when you step. The fire pit is quieter than the main chamber, its glow low and steady. You crouch slightly, resting the shovel's edge against the ash at the perimeter. The aim is not to stir recklessly, but to coax the embers into evenness. You work the shovel in slow arcs, pushing the darker ash away from the edges and toward the center, where the heat is strongest. The lighter ash floats upward in pale wisps, curling into the air before vanishing. A plain fact holds in your mind. In a lime kiln, the fire pit is as important as the chamber itself. If the pit's edges grow too heavy with ash, air cannot move properly, and the fire will falter. You've seen what happens when it's ignored. The glow dims. The stones cool too soon, and the night's work stretches longer than it should. You pause to glance into the kiln's mouth, noting the way the light pulses against the walls inside. The heat there is steady, which means your work here is doing its part. You scrape again, this time pulling a few stubborn coals toward the center. They hiss faintly as they meet hotter embers, and the glow spreads into them like ink into paper. Historians still argue whether medieval burners used shovels shaped like yours or long wooden paddles for this job. You suspect it depends on who had the better blacksmith in their village. This shovel has served you for years. The iron blade strong enough to push through compacted ash without bending, and narrow enough to work in tight spaces. A stray spark lands on the back of your hand, and you flick it away without much thought. The skin there already carries faint marks from other nights, small pale spots where the heat kissed too close. You shift your grip on the handle, using your boot to nudge one last pile of ash toward the center, before giving the pit a final smoothing pass. The glow is even now, the embers breathing together. You step back, resting the shovel's handle against your shoulder for a moment. A thin line of warmth rises from the pit, brushing your face and carrying with it the scent of resin from the woodpile. A moth drifts near the light, wings catching the faint orange before it veers away into the dark. You watch it for a moment, then set the shovel aside. It's work done for now. The pit will hold steady for a while, leaving you time for the next task. You dust your palms together, the ash clinging in fine streaks across your fingers. It works into the creases of your skin, turning each line pale. You'll wash it away later, but for now it stays with you, the mark of the work in progress. The night is still deep, but you can sense its slow turning. Somewhere above the trees, the stars have shifted, and you know that when they reach the far edge of the sky, dawn will not be far behind. For now, the kiln hums steadily, asking only for your quiet attention. You glance at the poker leaning nearby. It's time to tend the heart of the fire again, just enough to keep the stones drinking in the heat. You take the poker in hand. It's iron cool at first, though you know that will change quickly. The tip is darkened from years of being buried in embers, the surface rough where heat has eaten at it. You step toward the kiln's mouth, the glow spilling over your boots and up your legs. The warmth rises in slow waves, and you pause just at the edge, letting your skin adjust before leaning in. The bed of embers looks healthy a low, even sea of white and orange, shifting gently with the movement of the fire's breath. You slide the poker in at a shallow angle, the tip meeting resistance where ash has crusted over a section of glowing coal. With a slow twist, you break it open, revealing the richer light beneath. The air seems to sigh in relief as the heat rises. You work the poker in long, smooth strokes, never too fast. A plain fact guides you. Disturbing the fire too much at once can rob it of the steady rhythm it needs to burn the stones evenly. You've seen inexperienced hands poke and jab, scattering the embers until the heat is uneven. and the burn suffers. Tonight, you keep your movements measured. A soft sound greets you, the hiss of sap escaping from a log deeper in the kiln. You shift the poker toward it, nudging the log so that its surface faces the embers more fully. The flames catch at it almost immediately, licking up its grain in delicate, thin fingers. The light brightens for a moment, and you pull back to let it work. Historians still argue whether lime burners of your century aimed for a constant, unchanging fire or allowed for small cycles of rising and falling heat. You keep yours steady, avoiding those peaks and troughs. The stones you placed earlier will thank you for it later, even if no one else notices. You reach the far side of the bed, angling the poker upward to lift a stone just enough to let air curl beneath it. A puff of pale dust escapes as it settles again, swirling in the heat before vanishing. You can almost imagine the stone breathing, though you know it's simply the fire working its slow transformation. The poker grows warm in your grip now, the heat creeping down from the tip toward your hands. You shift it to your other palm for a moment, letting the cooler wood of the handle rest against your skin. The air close to the kiln is heavy with the scent of hot limestone, a dry, chalky smell that seems to cling to your nostrils. You give the embers one last smoothing pass, drawing the surface flat so the heat will spread evenly. Then you pull the poker free, resting it against the kiln side where it can cool before the next round. The glow holds steady, the bed breathing quietly in the darkness. For a moment you linger there, letting the warmth seep into your arms and chest. Beyond the edge of light, the night feels like another world, entirely colder, darker, untouched by the work at hand. You know you'll step back into it soon, but for now, the kiln's glow is enough. Your next thought is of the hour. Not the kind kept by bells or sundials, but the one your body knows. From countless nights here, the time when drowsiness presses hardest, and you must find a way to keep it at bay. You know the signs when sleep tries to creep in? It starts in the shoulders, a heaviness that makes you want to fold yourself toward the warmth of the kiln. Then it slides up behind the eyes, making them slow to blink. You feel it now, the weight of the night settling over you, like a damp blanket. You straighten your back and take a deliberate step away from the kiln's mouth, letting the cooler air wrap around you. The change wakes your skin, pulling the heat out of your cheeks. You roll your shoulders once, twice, as if shaking loose the slow tide of drowsiness. Standing still is the enemy here movement is what keeps you steady. You start pacing the narrow ring between the kiln and the woodpile, the packed dirt soft in places from ash, firm in others where countless boots have trod the same path. Your feet remember the route without your mind asking them to. One lap, two, three, the kiln's glow slipping past your shoulder each time. The shadows closing in at the far side before you swing back into light. A plain fact you've learned. Lime burners working through the night often fought sleep with small, constant motions, walking, shifting, rubbing the arms, because a moment's surrender could mean missed work or, worse, a dangerous drop in the fire's heat. You've never seen anyone truly sleep standing, but you've seen men sway close to it, eyes half closed as their hands still moved from habit. From the woodpile, you pick up a small piece of beech and begin tossing it from hand to hand. The weight forces your fingers to stay alert. Each catch brings the faint scent of old sap to your nose, a sharp, clean smell in the cool air. You toss higher once, catching it with a soft thud against your palm, then drop it back to the pile. Historians still argue whether medieval burners kept hot drinks at hand during night work or simply relied on cold water. You've never had anything but water here, though you've heard of yards where they brew thin broth to keep the stomach warm. Tonight, the water skin sits within reach, the cool taste enough to remind you that you are awake, here, and working. You pause near the kiln's far side, where its curved wall blocks most of the light. In the shadow, the night feels thicker, the air almost damp against your skin. You let it cool you for a few breaths before stepping back toward the heat. The contrast is sharp enough to make you blink faster. That's good. You rub your forearms briskly, the skin still carrying traces of clay and lime dust from earlier. The grit scratches faintly under your palms, another small anchor to keep you in the present. You kneel to adjust the angle of a log on the warming pile, then stand again, letting the movement settle your thoughts. The kiln's steady breathing fills the space around you, its rhythm as familiar as your own. You find yourself matching it, inhale when the fire hums low, exhale when it flares. This, too, keeps you anchored, your body in quiet conversation with the work. When the heaviness in your eyes lifts, you know the moment has passed. You take a last slow lap around the yard, feeling the firmness return to your steps. The kiln waits for its next check, and you are ready to listen to it again. The kiln master appears without sound, the way he always does, his steps so familiar to the yard that the ground doesn't seem to notice them. He is an older man, shoulders stooped but eyes sharp, the lines in his face catching the light from the kiln's mouth. He carries a short stick in his hand, not for walking, but for tapping. You've learned that when he circles the kiln, the stick is his voice, speaking to the fire through the shell of clay and stone. You step back to give him room. He moves slowly around the base, pausing every few paces to wrap the kiln's side with a gentle knock. The sound is different at each point here, a dull thud, there a faint ring. He tilts his head at these differences, listening the way you were listening earlier for the stone's pops and sighs. A plain fact you've been told. The tone of the kiln skin changes as the heat inside shifts. A hollow note can mean a section has thinned or cracked. A deep, solid one means the structure is holding well. You don't hear the differences as clearly as he does, but you can see the way his brow moves at certain notes, as if making a quiet ledger of what the night has done so far. At one seam, he stops longer, pressing the flat of his hand against the wall. You imagine he's feeling for the subtle tremor that heat and fire give to stone. After a moment, he nods not to you, not even to himself, but to the kiln. Then he moves on, the stick making its patient, even sounds against the surface. Historians still argue whether such inspections were ritual or true necessity. You've seen enough to know they're both. The kilnmaster's walk may not always find trouble, but it keeps the men watching, keeps the fire honest. And there's something about that measured pace in the night air that feels older than any one of you. When he completes the circle, he comes to stand beside you at the mouth. He doesn't speak at once, just squints into the glow, watching the embers shift. Finally, he gives a small nod toward the woodpile, a signal more than a request. You move without question, selecting 3 of the logs you warmed earlier. You set the first log into his hand, and he slides it into the kiln with a smooth motion, the kind that comes from decades of repetition. It lands exactly where he wants it, catching in the glow without disturbing the balance. The second follows, then the third, each placed like a stone in a wall. The fire hums in response, its light brightening just enough to paint his face in sharper lines. He hands the poker to you, and you use it to nudge the logs into place, mindful not to scrape too much ash from the bed. The kilnmaster watches for a moment longer, then rests the stick against his shoulder and walks away toward the far side of the yard, vanishing back into the shadows. You know he'll circle again before dawn, and you also know he'll remember every sound he heard tonight. For now, the kiln has his approval, and that's as close to praise as you'll get in this work. The logs are settling into the fire now, their bark curling back as the heat bites. You watch them for a moment, the flames tracing along the grain. Then you set the poker aside. The wood racks could use some tending before the next feeding, and this is as good a time as any. You walk toward the wood racks, their dark shapes leaning against the low wall at the far edge of the kiln's glow. Up close, you can see the way the racks bow slightly, under the weight of their load, not dangerously, but enough to remind you that they need care. The lower crosspieces are wedged with stones to keep them off the damp ground, yet one end has slumped, tilting the stacks of the logs lean at an uneven angle. You set your hands to the nearest beam, feeling the rough grain under your palms. A thin film of ash has settled here too, soft and dry against the wood. You press your shoulder into the rack, shifting it just enough to ease the strain on the far side. The logs creak as they settle, some knocking together with a dull thud. One near the top wobbles free and you catch it before it can fall, tucking it back into place with its end braced firmly. A plain fact crosses your mind. In the damp air of night, wood must be kept off the soil and angled so that rain, when it comes, will run away from it. Even seasoned wood can turn stubborn if it soaks through. In a lime kiln, stubborn wood means sluggish heat, and sluggish heat means long hours wasted. You crouch to inspect the stones that support the rack. One has shifted, perhaps from the ground softening under it, and you work it back into position with your boot heel. The fit is uneven, so you take a flat chip of limestone from the ground and wedge it beneath the beam. It holds, the rack straightening just enough to please your eye. Historians still argue whether medieval burners built permanent racks for storing wood or made temporary piles for each burn. You've known both, but a good rack is worth the time it keeps the work steady on nights like this when you can't afford to fight wet logs. You move to the second rack, which is in better shape but has gathered a scatter of loose bark and splinters at its base. You sweep them aside with your boot, making sure the ground is clear. Those scraps are no use in the kiln. They burn too fast, flashing away before they can give real heat. You toss them onto the ash heap instead, where they vanish into the pale dust. A faint pop from the kiln's direction catches your attention, not urgent, but enough to make you glance back. The glow at the mouth looks unchanged, the fire still breathing as it should. You turn back to the rack, lifting a short log to check its weight. It feels right light, seasoned, ready for the fire. You place it near the front of the warming pile so it will be within reach later. When you've finished, you step back and look over the racks. The beams sit straighter now, the stacks more orderly. It's the kind of work no one will remark on, but you'll know it when you reach for the next log in the dark and find it exactly where it should be. You dust your palms against your tunic, sending a faint cloud of powder into the cool air. The warmth from the kiln calls you back, but before you return, you take a slow breath of the night cooler here, quieter, holding a stillness the fire never does. The next task will bring you closer again, to where the heat seeps into your bones and stays there. You'll let it, just for a while. You step back toward the kiln, the warmth meeting you halfway, seeping in before you've even reached its side. It's a gentle kind of heat here, not the sharp blast of the mouth, but a steady radiance that settles into your muscles. You stop for a moment, letting it soak into your legs, into your back, loosening the stiffness from the work at the racks. The air carries the faint tang of lime dust, mixed with the sweeter scent of beech sap, a blend you've come to think of as the smell of the night itself. You place your hand on the kiln's flank. The surface is warm, not scalding. The clay smooth where repairs have been made, rougher where the outer skin has baked and cracked over years of burns. Beneath your palm, you feel the faintest vibration, the fire's slow breathing, translated through stone and clay. It's not something you would notice if you weren't looking for it, but once found, it's impossible to ignore. A plain fact, heat like this is not just comfort, it's proof the kiln is healthy. If the warmth faded too quickly at the sides, it would mean the heart inside was losing strength. But tonight, it holds well, steady, and even from one end to the other. You shift your stance so that more of your side catches the warmth. The difference is immediate. Your arms and shoulders slacken, your jaw unclenches. The work makes you carry tension without thinking, and here, near the kiln's belly, you let it go. For a few breaths, you close your eyes and simply stand, feeling the fire's energy travel outward to meet you. Historians still argue whether burners in your time took moments like this to rest against the kiln, or if such pauses were rare, stolen only when no one was watching. In your yard, no one remarks on it. Every man here knows that the fire's warmth is both tool and gift. You open your eyes and trace a line along the kiln side with your fingertips, following the curve upward until it disappears into shadow. The clay bears marks from years of use, faint ridges from smoothing hands, shallow dents where stones once struck it, patches where fresh clay has been pressed over older repairs. It is not beautiful in the way of a church wall, but it has the same sense of permanence. A flicker of light from the mouth catches your attention. You walk slowly toward it, feeling the air grow hotter with each step. The glow is rich, full-bodied, the bed of embers shifting in slow, deliberate movement. You watch for a while, your face warmed, your back cooled by the night behind you. You know you can't linger too long in this place of balance. The work will call you to move again, to sweep ash, to check the vents, to feed the fire when it's ready. But for now, you let yourself have these few moments, letting the heat settle deep into your bones where the cool of morning won't reach so easily. When you step away, the night air feels sharper, almost eager to claim you back. You breathe it in, refreshed, and turn toward the path that needs clearing of ash before the next round begins. You take up the rough bristled broom from where it leans against the woodpile. Its handle is worn smooth in the middle, the bristles splayed and gray from years of sweeping ash. You carry it toward the narrow path that curves around the kiln, the one you and the others walk again and again in the dark. Ash has drifted here in pale patches, caught by the shifting wind and the kiln's breath. If left too long, it makes the ground soft underfoot, slippery in places where the earth is already smooth. You plant the broom at the edge and draw it toward you, the bristles rasping across the packed dirt. The ash moves reluctantly at first, then gathers into a faint cloud that drifts upward before settling again in the heap you've made. You sweep in long, deliberate strokes, each pass clearing a strip of earth, until the path shows its true color beneath a darker brown that catches the light differently than the pale dust. A plain fact: sweeping ash isn't only about keeping your footing. The fine, lime-laden dust can cling to damp boots, and if tracked back into the woodpile, it can dry and crack the ends of the logs. Clean paths mean clean fuel, and clean fuel means a steadier fire. As you work, the ash makes a faint hiss where the broom drags through thicker patches. Now and then, you pause to let the air settle so you're not breathing in more dust than you must. The taste of it is sharp and dry, finding its way to the back of your throat even when you try to avoid it. You've learned to press your tongue lightly to the roof of your mouth when sweeping. It seems to keep less of the grit from settling there. Historians still argue whether medieval limeyards kept their paths clear for safety, or simply because ash underfoot was unpleasant. In your yard, it's both. A night without sweeping leaves the work slower and clumsier the next day. You reach a bend where the light from the kiln fades into shadow. Here, the ash is deeper, built up in the shelter from the wind. You work the broom more firmly, pushing the pale dust into a mound that catches the firelight faintly as it tumbles. Your boots leave clear prints in the path behind you, each one a dark oval against the swept earth. When the heap is large enough, you take the flat shovel and lift it into the ash pile near the kiln's base. The mound there is already high, a soft hill that will grow taller before the burn is done. Each shovelful releases a little puff into the air, curling upward before vanishing into the night. You return to the path for one last pass, smoothing the surface so the next man can walk it without looking down. The broom's bristles whisper against the ground, the sound almost lost in the low hum of the fire. When you finish, you rest the broom against the kiln side, the bristles pointing outward to dry in the heat. Your palms are faintly powdered now, the skin dry where the dust has clung. You rub them together, the fine ash drifting away in the glow. The path is clear, the air around it a little cleaner. You glance toward the smaller vessels near the kiln's edge, the ones used for testing lime quality. They will need checking soon, to see how the stones are faring in their smaller trials before you judge the larger mass inside. You cross to the low wooden table where the smaller clay pots sit in a loose row near the kiln's edge. Each one is wide-mouthed and squat, made to hold a few carefully chosen chunks of stone. They are the testers, a way to see the fire's progress without disturbing the main load inside the kiln. The pots are dusted white now, their surfaces warm from the nearness of the heat. You crouch beside the first pot, running your fingertips lightly over its rim. The clay is warm, but not too hot to touch. Inside, the stones lie quiet, their surfaces dull in the shadow. You lift one gently, turning it in your palm. It feels lighter than when you placed it here hours ago, the first sign that the fire has begun drawing its moisture away. A plain fact: lime burners often use these small vessels to judge whether the burn was advancing evenly. If the stones in the tester were too far along, you'd know the main kiln might be running too hot. If they were still heavy and damp inside, the heat might be lagging. The tester's truth saved you from guessing at the heart of the kiln. You set the stone back and move to the next pot. This one holds smaller pieces, cut more sharply from the quarry. They're lighter still, and when you tap one gently against another, the sound is higher, more hollow. That's a good sign. It means the fire is chasing out the last of the water trapped in their grain. You replace them exactly as they were, aligning each chip so the air moves evenly around them. Historians still argue whether these testers were used in all medieval lime yards or only in those that could afford the extra clay work. You've always had them here, passed down from burner to burner, patched when they cracked, replaced when the fire took them completely. The third pot is warmer, the stones inside paler than the others. You lift one and hold it near the kiln's glow. Its surface is starting to flake under your thumb, the texture like dry bread. That tells you the outer layers are changing, even if the heart is still solid. You don't need to break it open to know experience teaches your hands as much as your eyes. A faint hiss drifts from the kiln's mouth, followed by the sharper pop of a log splitting under the heat. You glance up, watching the light shift inside, then turn back to the testers. You make a mental note to adjust the wood feed later, just enough to keep the balance steady. When you've checked each pot, you dust your hands against your tunic, leaving pale smears across the fabric. You step back, satisfied that the burn is on track. The testers have spoken quietly, but clearly. The kiln's heart is working as it should. You place the lid on the nearest pot, a simple disc of clay meant to keep stray ash from settling too thickly on the stones. Then you rise, stretching your back. The heat from the kiln's side still presses warmly into your legs, but the air beyond its circle is cool enough to draw you outward. It's time to take a brief pause, just long enough to close your eyes for a few moments on the sack by the woodpile, before the kiln calls you back again. You walk to the woodpile's shadowed side, where a burlap sack lies folded against the wall. It's not a bed, but it's softer than the bare earth, and the faint smell of grain still clings to it from its former use. You ease yourself down, lowering your weight slowly so the stiffness in your knees doesn't complain too loudly. The ground is cooler here, the kiln's heat only a memory against your skin. You pull your knees up slightly, resting your forearms on them, and let your head sink forward. The roar and hiss of the kiln are still present, but from this distance they're muffled, like hearing the sea from a street away. You close your eyes, not to sleep, that would be too risky, but to let the tension in your body ease for a few precious minutes. A plain fact drifts into your mind. Lime burners often rested in brief, shallow dozes during the long night hours, trusting their ears more than their eyes to keep them tethered to the work. You've done it enough to know your body will stir at the smallest change in the kiln's voice. The burlap under your palms is rough, the weave leaving faint impressions in your skin. You shift your weight once, settling into the faint give of the packed earth beneath. Your breathing slows to match the kiln's long inhale as the fire hums low, slow exhale as it flares with the bite of fresh air. Historians still argue whether men in your trade shared these resting spots or guarded them as personal territory. In this yard, no one claims a place. Whoever needs the burlap takes it, and when you rise, another will take your spot without a word. You'll let your head tilt slightly, the night air cooling the side of your face. Somewhere beyond the wall, an owl calls once, twice, then fades into silence. Your eyes remain closed, but you picture the kiln as you left it. The even glow, the steady breath, the stones hidden in their slow transformation. Time slips oddly in these moments. You can't say whether you've been sitting for 1 minute or 10 when a soft crack from the fire reaches your ear sharper than the usual shifting of logs. Your eyes open at once, the quiet rest over. You rise without haste, dusting the grit from your palms onto the ground. The stiffness in your knees returns as you stand, but it fades quickly once you take the first steps back toward the light. The kiln's glow grows stronger with each pace, wrapping you again in its warmth. Whatever shift you heard, it wasn't trouble. The fire is still breathing evenly, the mouth still bright. But you know it's time to tend it again, to move the embers so the heat remains faithful. The poker waits where you left it, leaning against the kiln's side. You reach for it, the iron cool now, ready for your hand. You take the poker in both hands, feeling its familiar balance as you step toward the kiln's mouth. The warmth increases with each step, the air becoming heavier, carrying that dry, mineral scent of stone meeting heat. You pause just short of the lip, letting your skin adjust before leaning closer. The glow inside is steady, but slightly uneven at one edge, where a patch of embers has dulled to a darker red. You slide the poker in slowly, breaking the crust over that darker patch. The sound is faint but distinct, a crackle, then a gentle hiss as the freed embers breathe again. A ripple of brighter light spreads across the bed, and the heat rises against your face. You work in arcs, coaxing the fire back to evenness without scattering it. Too much stirring and the embers would lose their strength. Too little, and the stones nearest the dull patch would lag behind in their burn. A plain fact you keep in mind. Lime burns best when the heat surrounds every stone equally, not when the fire favors one side of the kiln. A single cold spot can leave you with lumps that never fully transform, wasting both wood and labor. You nudge a log in the back, rolling it slightly so the flames can curl up its side. Sap snaps inside it, sending out two tiny sparks that vanish before they touch the ground. The flames there brighten, and you step back for a moment to watch. The kiln responds like a living thing, breathing deeper, its glow evening out again. Historians still argue whether medieval burners aimed to keep a perfectly level ember bed, or whether small variations were expected and tolerated. You've always kept yours, as even as your patience allows it, spares you from problems later when the lime is drawn. The poker's iron shaft is warm now, the heat creeping toward your palms. You switch your grip briefly, resting the tip against the clay lip while you adjust your stance. Then you ease it back into the bed, drawing a shallow channel across the center. This lets the air flow more freely, feeding the fire without forcing it. The flames lift, not in a rush, but in a calm, deliberate climb. You rest the poker against the kiln side once more. It's work done for now. The mouth glows evenly, the embers breathing in quiet harmony. You wipe your palms on your tunic, feeling the faint grit left by the iron and ash. The fire is balanced again. It will hold for a little while, long enough for you to tend to the smaller tasks, the ones that keep the night moving forward. Your eyes drift toward the woodpile, then to the bucket of water near the edge of the yard. A drink will wash the dust from your throat before the next round. You walk to the bucket, its shape just visible in the dim edge of the kiln's glow. The water inside catches a faint glimmer from the fire, a pale reflection broken by the slight ripple of your steps on the earth. A wooden dipper rests across the rim, the handle smooth from many hands. You take it and lower it into the bucket, hearing the hollow splash as it fills. Lifting it to your mouth, you drink slowly, letting the coolness wash over your tongue and down your throat. The water tastes faintly of wood from the dipper, and of the air in the yard, a mixture of ash, dust, and distant night breeze. You hold the last mouthful for a moment before swallowing, as if to stretch its relief a little longer. A plain fact: water is the only drink that lasts through a full burn without souring, and it is as much a tool as the poker or shovel. Without it, your mouth would turn to chalk before the night was half over. You've heard of burners in other towns who mix a little vinegar into the water to cut the dust, but here you've never felt the need. The bucket creaks faintly as you set the dipper back. Behind you, the kiln breathes its steady heat, and the air at your back is warmer than at your chest. You turn slightly so the warmth meets you again, driving away the cool that has settled into your sleeves. Historians still argue whether water was shared freely among the crew, or if each man kept his own. In this yard, the bucket is for all, and no one keeps count. You've never seen it empty before morning, but you've also never seen anyone take more than they need. From the shadows, another man approaches and nods at you before taking his own drink. You step aside without words, giving him space, and glance toward the woodpile. A short log lies across the top, set there to warm earlier. You pick it up and feel its surface dry now. The sap no longer cool against the bark. It will be ready when the fire asks for it. The man with the dipper finishes and moves away toward the bellows. You carry the warmed log closer to the kiln, setting it within easy reach of the mouth. For now, it waits. The embers are still strong from the last tending, and there's no need to rush them. You stand for a moment with your hands resting loosely at your sides, feeling the pull of the heat on your front and the night's cool on your back. It's a quiet balance, one that reminds you how the whole night feels a slow shifting between two temperatures, two kinds of air, neither ever winning completely. Somewhere beyond the yard, a faint rustle comes from the trees. You can't see the cause, and you don't try. The kiln holds your focus, the rest of the world reduced to sounds at its edges. The fire will want your attention again soon, and you'll be ready with wood in hand and water in reach. You take up the long pole from where it rests along the kiln's side, a simple tool, just a stripped branch, smoothed enough to slide through your hands. Its length lets you reach the far edges of the fire pit, stirring where the poker cannot. You step to the mouth, the heat pushing against your face, and slide the pole in along the edge of the ember bed. The wood meets a pocket of cooler ash, the resistance lighter there, and you give it a gentle push to break the crust. Beneath, the embers glow brighter, a soft rush of heat meeting the new air. You draw the pole back, Then move it to the opposite edge, working in slow, deliberate arcs. Each stroke brings a faint hiss, as though the kiln is pleased at the attention. A plain fact you've learned: the edges of the bed are where the heat falters first, and if left alone, they can become thin corridors of weakness in the burn. Stirring them keeps the fire's reach even, making sure no stone sits too long in a cool shadow. From somewhere deep inside, a log shifts with a muted crack, and a brief flare of flame licks up through the embers. You angle the pole toward it, nudging the wood so it rests more squarely, feeding the fire's heart without smothering it. The movement sends a small puff of pale dust into the air, swirling briefly before it drifts away. Historians still argue whether such stirring was done at set intervals or only when the burner sensed the need. You've never watched a clock for it. You move the fire when it feels right. And tonight, the rhythm told you now was the time. You pull the pole out and check its tip. The wood is darkened but not charred, a sign you've worked quickly enough. If left in too long, it would take the fire for itself, becoming fuel before its time. You tap the tip gently on the ground, shaking loose a few clinging flecks of ash, then set it back in its place along the kiln's wall. The ember bed now looks smoother, more even, its light steady across the whole surface. You watch it for a few breaths, making sure the movement you've made holds. The fire breathes evenly again, drawing in air from the mouth and sending it upward in a faint shimmer. You wipe your palms on your tunic, feeling the dry grit there, and step back into the cooler fringe of the kiln's light. The warmth lingers in your face and arms, but your back already feels the touch of the night air. There's a certain quiet satisfaction in this small work, not dramatic, but essential. You know the fire will thank you for it in its own wordless way, by keeping its glow steady until the next turn comes. Your eyes drift to your hands, the lines dusted pale from the lime-rich ash. You rub your fingers together and watch the powder lift into the air before disappearing into the dark. The kiln is breathing well, the night is holding steady, and you can turn to the next simple task, checking the condition of your own hands before they meet more stone. You hold your hands out toward the kiln's glow, turning them slowly in the light. The pale smudge of lime dust clings to every crease, the fine powder settling into the skin no matter how often you wipe it away. You rub your palms together, feeling the faint grit grind against itself. It's dry, almost slippery, but you know too much of it can crack the skin if you let it sit too long. From your belt pouch, you take a small clay jar no bigger than your fist filled with olive oil. The jar's surface is smooth from years of use, and when you open it, the faint scent of the oil rises above the kiln's smoke. You pour a little into your palm, the liquid warm almost at once in the fire's heat, and work it over your hands in slow circles. The oil darkens the dust, turning it to a pale paste before soaking in. A plain fact: burners have long known that a thin coat of oil on the skin keeps lime dust from biting too deeply. Without it, the dust will draw every drop of moisture it can from your hands, leaving them raw by morning. You've heard of men wrapping their palms in cloth instead, but cloth can catch fire too easily near the kiln. Oil is quieter, safer. You press the oil into each finger, working along the knuckles, the base of the thumb, and the rough skin at the heel of your palm. The warmth from the kiln helps it soak in faster, leaving your skin slick for only a moment before it feels soft again. You flex your hands, testing the ease of movement. The stiffness that had crept in fades a little. Historians still argue whether olive oil was common among burners, or if it was a small luxury afforded only by certain yards. Here it is passed down like any other tool, always kept, always replaced. A jar can last many nights, and you guard it carefully, making sure it never spills on the dusty ground. When you finish, you wipe your fingertips lightly on the inside of your tunic, more to remove the last of the dust than the oil itself. Your hands gleam faintly in the light now, the skin catching the orange glow before you close the jar and return it to your belt. You flex your fingers again, satisfied. Soon, they'll be back in the work lifting stone, shifting wood, smoothing clay, but for now, they rest easy at your sides. You glance toward the horizon, though there is no hint of dawn yet. The night is still deep, the kiln still asking for the same patient care as when you began. Near the mouth, a log has burned down to half its size, its end crumbling into white ash. That will need tending before long. But first, you take a moment to simply stand, letting the warmth soak into your freshly tended hands, as if the fire is approving of your care. You step toward the kiln's mouth again, the change in heat immediate on your face. The embers have held their glow well, but the light at the center is softer now, the color leaning more toward deep orange than the pale white it should keep. You know this is the moment when the fire begins to ease itself if you don't guide it. You take up the poker and slide it along the bed, nudging the embers until the brighter tones return. The half-burned log you noticed earlier is still there, its end collapsed into ash. You hook it gently, pulling it toward the center where the heat is stronger. It breaks in two, the softer half crumbling at once, the harder end rolling into place with a muted thud. A plain fact: in a burn that lasts through the night, you must watch for moments like this, not a crisis, but a subtle slowing, because once the heat drops, it takes more wood and more work to bring it back than to keep it steady in the first place. You reach for the log you warmed earlier and ease it into the gap. It catches the light immediately, its bark curling back as the heat takes hold. You nudge it just enough to rest against its neighbor, knowing the fire will climb between them. Sap snaps inside it, sending a faint sweet smell into the air that cuts briefly through the kiln's chalky scent. Historians still argue whether medieval burners placed fresh wood deep into the embers or let it catch at the edges before moving it inward. You've always preferred the latter, a gentle introduction rather than a shock, letting the wood wake slowly before giving it the full press of the fire. The kiln's breath shifts slightly, the sound deepening as the new wood begins to feed it. You step back, resting the poker against your shoulder, and watch the glow brighten again in slow, sure degrees. The warmth thickens, pressing against your skin. From the far side of the yard, one of the other men moves into view, his hands full of fresh logs. He nods once as he passes, setting them down near the warming pile. You return the nod without speaking. Words aren't needed in this rhythm of work. You push the poker back into its place and wipe your hands against your tunic, leaving faint pale streaks where dust has settled on the cloth. The fire is steady again, the kind of steady that will last a while before it needs you. Your gaze drifts upward to the horizon. Still no light, but the stars have shifted, the familiar cluster you follow each night now tilting toward the edge of the sky. The night is moving on, and so are you. Next will come the first signs of the morning air, a change you can feel before you see it. You sense it before it's fully there, the faintest thinning in the cool air beyond the kiln's glow, a change in how it moves across your skin. It isn't warmth exactly, just a softening of the night's edge. You've stood in this yard enough to know it means dawn is on its slow approach, even if the horizon still holds to its darkness. You lean the poker back against the kiln's wall and step toward the open side of the yard. The kiln's heat loosens its grip as you walk away, and the coolness meets you again, though it no longer feels as deep as it did hours ago. The scent of wood smoke lingers in your tunic and hair, but the air beyond the fire carries something else now, a dampness that speaks of fields and earth stirring awake. A plain fact: even without sight of the sun, lime burners could often tell the turn toward morning simply by the shift in the air. It's a skill you didn't notice learning, one that arrived quietly after years of nights like this. You pause in the darker fringe of the yard, letting your eyes lift to the sky. The stars still burn, but the smallest hint of gray rests just at the line where the hills meet the sky. It's not yet light enough to work by, but it's the first piece of day, waiting. Somewhere in the trees below, a bird gives a single note, not a song, just a sound to say it is awake. Historians still argue whether night crews in your time changed pace as morning neared, or kept to the same slow rhythm until the fire was finally left to its own. Here, you keep working, as always. The kiln doesn't care for the clock. It cares for its breath and its heat, whether under stars or sky. You stand for a few more breaths in the cool, listening to the quiet sounds of the hour. In the stillness, the kiln's hum is lower, more like a steady heartbeat behind you. You know that inside, the stones are still changing, grain by grain, their work unseen. When you turn back toward the glow, the kiln welcomes you into its warmth again. The light's soft, but steady. The logs you placed earlier have caught well, their ends shining with a white-hot core beneath the ash. You step closer, feeling the heat wrap around your arms, and rest your hand briefly on the kiln's side. The night is easing, but the work holds the same. You'll give the fire one more feeding before the sky begins to pale. You reach for the logs on the warming pile, their bark dry and faintly warm to the touch. The closest one is light in the hand, its weight just right for the fire's current mood. You tuck it under your arm, take a second in your other hand, and step toward the kiln's mouth. The air thickens with heat as you approach, the glow washing across your boots and up into your face. The embers are steady now, breathing in a slow rhythm that matches the faint pull of air at your ankles. You crouch, setting the first log carefully at the edge of the bed so its bark faces inward. The flames reach for it immediately, curling in thin orange fingers along its length. You watch for a moment, then place the second log a little farther back, leaning it against the first so they share the heat. A plain fact: wood fed in pairs often catches more evenly than a single log, each reflecting heat into the other, until both are burning with the same strength. You've done it often enough to trust it without thinking. The kiln answers with a small shift in tone, not louder, but fuller, the sound of air moving more freely. A thin ribbon of smoke drifts upward from the logs before disappearing into the hotter air above. You take the poker and nudge each piece just slightly, giving them the space to breathe without rolling into the center too soon. Historians still argue whether medieval burners planned their final feedings before dawn, as carefully as the first ones after dusk. In your yard, the last feeding of the night is done with the same care as the first. The fire does not know it is near the end, and so it must be treated as though the whole burn still lies ahead. You lean back on your heels, letting the heat soak into your face and forearms. The logs crackle softly, the sap releasing in quick, sharp pops. The glow deepens again, bright and strong, and you know this feed will carry well into the next hour. Stepping back, you rest the poker against the kiln side and wipe your hands against your tunic. The pale streaks of lime dust have grown fainter over the night as oil and sweat work them into the fabric, but they still mark you as part of this place, as surely as the kiln's own cracks and patches mark its long life. The stars are dimmer now, their edges blurring into the faint light that is beginning to gather behind the hills. You take in a slow breath of the warming air, the scent of wood smoke and lime dust twining together. Soon, the first true daylight will reach the yard, but for this moment, the world is still balanced between night and morning. There is one last task before you let the kiln hold itself for a while. You'll check the draw hole again, to hear what the fire says in these final hours of darkness. You crouch again at the kiln's base, where the draw hole waits like a low, watchful eye. The clay rim is warm beneath your hand, the heat steady and even. You lean close, feeling the faint breath of air moving out warmer now than during your last check, with a dryness that speaks of deeper progress inside. Peering into the small dark mouth, you see only a faint red glow, a softer light than the bright heart above. It pulses gently, the fire's quieter voice, hidden from the flame's more restless dance. You listen, your ear near the opening, catching the low hum of heat passing through stone. Now and then there's the faint, almost secret sound of lime dust, sifting down the whisper of stone becoming something else. A plain fact: the draw hole tells you not only the temperature but the kiln's balance. If the air is sluggish here, the fire above is too choked. If it roars, the heat is racing away too fast. Tonight, it is somewhere in between, calm, measured, just as it should be for the last stretch before dawn. You take the short stick kept for this purpose, its end blackened from many such checks, and slide it gently inside. The warmth greets it instantly, and when you withdraw it, the tip glows faintly for a breath before fading. That tells you enough the heat is deep and even, not merely skimming the surface of the stone. Historians still argue whether medieval burners tested the draw hole at fixed intervals, or only when their instincts told them. You've always trusted the latter. The kiln speaks in its own time, and you've learned to hear it. You rest a hand on the kiln's side, feeling the low, steady vibration through the clay. It's the kind of strength that means you can leave the fire to itself for a while. Soon the others will take over the tending, and you'll walk home through streets just waking. For now, you cover the draw hole with its clay plug, pressing it in firmly so the heat stays where it belongs. The kiln breathes through its mouth alone once more, its rhythm unchanged by your brief inspection. When you stand, your knees feel the hours you've been here. The sky above has shifted, no longer deep black, but a washed, quiet gray. It's time for the last act of the night, feeding the kiln once more so it will carry the morning without complaint. You walk to the warming pile one last time, selecting 2 medium logs and a smaller one to fill the gaps. Their bark is dry and loose now, flakes breaking away under your fingers. You carry them to the kiln's mouth, feeling the air grow thicker with heat as you approach. The glow is strong, but you know it will need this final gift before you leave it to its own keeping. Kneeling at the lip, you set the first log near the back, sliding it into place with care so it won't jostle the stones. The second you place along the side, where the embers are bright but not yet white hot. The smaller piece goes last, laid across the others like a bridge, ensuring the flames will leap between them easily. A plain fact: the last feeding before leaving a kiln is done with the same patience as any other, perhaps more, because you will not be there to correct its mood. Each log must be placed to catch steadily, neither rushing nor smoldering. The fire accepts the offering without fuss. Thin flames creep along the bark, then sink into the grain. Sap hisses in quiet bursts, and the glow deepens across the bed. You give each log a small nudge with the poker, then rest it back against the kiln's wall. The embers breathe in a slow, steady pulse, ready for the next hours without you. Historians still argue whether night burners stayed until full daylight or handed the fire over to fresh hands just before dawn. Here, the work changes quietly, one man's watch sliding into another's without ceremony. You will be gone before the sun rises high enough to warm the yard on its own. You stand, brushing the pale dust from your palms. The sky above the kiln is no longer gray, but touched with the faintest wash of color, the first suggestion of morning. The air feels different now, cooler, where the light has not yet reached, softer where it has. You walk the slow circle around the kiln, checking seams, glancing at the wood racks, making sure nothing will need urgent hands before the next shift settles in. Everything is as it should be. The kiln hums, patient, alive in its own way. When you pass the mouth again, you stop for a moment, letting the heat settle into your face one last time. Then, you turn toward the path that leads away from the yard. Your steps are steady but slow, the warmth still in your hands, the dust still in your clothes. Behind you, the kiln breathes on, its glow soft in the growing light. Ahead, the village is waking faint voices, the smell of early fires, the shapes of roofs against the dawn. You walk toward it without hurry, knowing you'll return to the kiln soon enough, when another night calls for the same patient work. The path away from the kiln is quiet, the earth beneath your boots still holding a trace of the night's chill. Each step feels unhurried, as if the hours of steady tending have pressed their own rhythm into your body. Behind you, the glow fades slowly, the kiln's light giving way to the pale wash of morning. The hum of the fire is softer now at this distance, but you can still sense it, a faint, steady presence, like a warm memory that lingers in the bones. The air ahead carries the scent of damp earth and wood smoke from the village. Somewhere a door creaks open, and the muffled sound of a bucket being set down echoes briefly in the stillness. A rooster calls once, its voice cutting across the calm without breaking it. These are the first signs of the day, unfolding at their own gentle pace. You pass a low stone wall, its surface cool and rough under your fingertips. Moss grows along the shaded side, holding on to the night's moisture. Beyond it, a narrow field stretches toward the hills, the faint light just beginning to pick out the lines where the soil was turned days ago. Each breath feels easier here, away from the kiln's dense heat. The dust has settled in your clothes, a pale reminder of the work, and the faint smell of lime still clings to your skin. You don't rush to wash it away, it is part of the night you've kept, proof of the fire's long conversation with stone. When the first true sunlight touches the edge of the rooftops, you know the kiln is still breathing steadily behind you, its heat wrapped around the stones, carrying them toward their final change. The night's work is done. The day's work belongs to someone else. We hope this slow day at an old trade has been a peaceful escape. If you found it comforting, you may like, share, or leave a thoughtful note. And you can subscribe so you'll be with us for the next quiet craft from the past. We hope this little journey through time has been a pleasant one for you. If you'd like to hear more, please like, share, or leave a kind comment. And make sure to subscribe so you'll be here for the next unhurried story from Timeless and Boring. Sweet dreams.